Thank you, everybody, for coming. Very excited to be in Seattle. Got to bust out my check flannel shirt, so excited to be in the Pacific Northwest. So today I'm going to be talking to you about some fun shenanigans in the world of Azure. I work at BeyondTrust. I'm a cybersecurity researcher. And today I want to talk to you about a mystery that came across my desk. I was sort of working my usual kind of a little bit more humdrum research kind of thing, and then a partner of ours reached out, very, very confused as to how a guest had made a subscription. So I'm going to explain exactly what a guest is in the world of Azure Active Directory and what a subscription is. Basically, this partner was really confused because this guest had no special permission to be able to create this subscription as far as they could see. And as I'd published a bit of work on Azure before, they reached out to me and asked, hey, what's going on here? And so basically, the aim of today's talk is for any of you working in Azure to understand the true threat model of guests. As far as I can tell, this has not been ever properly documented. 2 weeks ago, Microsoft did release some documentation. I think it is still a little bit incomplete to really help people understand the true threat model of guests. So let's review a few facts about the case. So the guest account's credentials were leaked to the dark web. The account was a B2B guest user. And for those people not familiar with the B2B guest user feature, basically it's a way that you can add users into your tenant, into your directory, and not have to pay for them is the main thing. And so basically, rather than have to kind of onboard a user, eat into your kind of licensing costs for users, you can say that, hey, this user is going to come from another directory, they're external collaborators, and then you're not going to get charged for that, which is cool from a money saving point of view. The issue is that then you don't manage the account lifecycle of this user. So the other directory is responsible for potentially enforcing MFA and all fun stuff like that. So while you get to save some money, there's potentially some things to really consider about using these things, about using the B2B guest user feature. So then I confirmed going through what permissions this guest had, and as far as we could tell, the guest had no special permissions. So it wasn't a member of a single group. It hadn't been assigned a directory role, and it had no RBAC roles. No other permissions granted. So how was the guest able to make a subscription? In order to answer that, we're going to go through the basics. So if you don't know what Azure Active Directory is, I'll go through that with you, what kind of Azure resources are. Then we're going to get into the weeds to really understand some of the kind of more difficult to understand features, and then we're going to get into undocumented behavior. And while there is some documentation, as I say, I think it still is a little bit lacking. Then we'll get into what Microsoft thought about this, and then some possible ways to abuse this, and then finally how you can actually defend against this. So I am a physicist. Is my background, was more in the kind of developer, kind of software engineer world of things, and a couple of years ago have kind of transitioned into cybersecurity, and I love to talk about all things graph theory, and I'm a big graph nerd guy, so lots of the visualizations you'll see are all kind of graph visualizations. Okay, so Azure Basics. So this is kind of how Microsoft wants you to think about what Entra ID is. So you can kind of see that you can connect up to your HR systems. So that could be Bamboo HR. You can have external identities, that's the kind of B2B guest users. You can also connect it up to your on-premise stuff, Active Directory. Entra ID was the cloud replacement for the on-premise like Active Directory that existed a long time ago. And you can see there's also this devices thing that's like just hanging off of the visualization. We'll get into devices and exactly what they are. I'm going to try and like break it down just like a little bit more systematically. So first of all, like Entra ID. So like at its heart, you've got this idea of that like users and like guest users are going to be able to like authenticate against the directory. You've also got service principals. These are like your kind of like machine identities. And then you've got devices. Those do also get authenticated against the directory. They're not like true security principles, but they're more kind of like an environment in which true security principles can like operate in and potentially used in like trust-based decisions. So that's kind of like the absolute basics. In terms of like privileges, you can give users like directory roles. That means that they're going to be able to do things against the Entra ID tenant itself. And then we've got like RBAC roles, which we're going to get into Azure resources and RBAC roles. And then you can kind of give these users app roles. Service principals, these machine identities, pretty much the same thing, except instead of app roles, they have like API permissions. And then you can put those things in security groups and hand out like the privileges that way. So all pretty basic stuff. Okay, so Azure resources, this is where stuff gets a little bit weirder. So subscriptions are really like the logical container for resources. So resources being all of your like infrastructure, right? So your VMs, potentially your databases, your blob storage, like any kind of like actual infrastructure that you're making is going to be contained inside of a subscription. It may optionally be inside of a like resource group. That can be a way to kind of further organize things. But the subscriptions is really like your like kind of the kind of like security boundary between the different like the different infrastructure. So it's going to kind of get build under a different heading, and that. We notice at the very top there is this thing that's going to come into play and is quite important. So above subscriptions, we have management groups. So management groups are then a way that we can apply like management policies against like all of the subscriptions. And so then the directory itself like ties to the management group, and you can have recursive management groups, but it's always going to tie up to one root level management group. And that's going to be quite important later, so hold on to that in your brains.
Can you get the clicker plugged in?
Oh yeah.
So then we don't have to have you.
Please, that would be amazing.
Sorry about that.
No, all good. I don't have a USB.
Let's see. Does this one? Something do this. Oh, no. How do I?
There might be a micro USB.
All right. Maybe I'll carry on while you're doing that.
Sure.
Okay. While we get this sorted, I'll just go over. So like RBAC roles. So typically you can make your own RBAC roles. Like the kind of like default kind of things is, you're going to have like owners of resources. Those are the people who obviously like are the end owners kind of thing. But then you have kind of contributors. So those guys have like write access too. And then you can have kind of like things like reader stuff. So all pretty kind of like standard stuff. And it's like a pattern. You see this pattern kind of like being rolled out like across a lot of like Azure. So those are RBAC roles that we can have over infrastructure. Getting into the weeds. That's like understand exactly how like these guest users are behaving. So when someone decides to invite a guest user into your directory, the invite's going to get sent out to them. You're just going to enter the email of that person. But when they get into your directory, they're going to actually like federate in. So they're going to authenticate against their own home directory and then get federated in, and then they're going to be authorized as a guest into your directory. Because obviously there's like room for this to, because they're kind of external collaborators, the idea is that out of the box, guest users have even less permissions than like typical users do. So they're something close to zero trust users. I won't say they've got no privileges out of the box, but they're very, very limited in terms of like just being a guest in a tenant really doesn't get you the ability to do very much at all. Okay. So that's like after we've invited someone, and you can see can I point with this thing? Anyway, you can see under user type, there's this identities field, and that says Microsoft account. That could either be Microsoft account or external AD, external Azure AD, and that just means that this person's coming from either a Microsoft account or another external Azure AD, and then federating into the directory. Okay, so this is a really not very well understood feature, but is super critical to understand how we can pull off this weird behavior. So billing agreements, they're really just like a sidecar to directory, like Azure directories and Azure resources. So like this is just kind of like, you know, the domain of your kind of financial department, as it were. There's like two ways that you can get billed for stuff in the world of Azure. There's like enterprise agreements, those are the legacy stuff, and then the new model is Microsoft customer agreements. They've got like, both of them have got a similar kind of hierarchy. It's not too important, the exact hierarchy here, but you've basically got something that kind of represents the actual like contract at the top. The department and the invoice section are kind of just like ways to kind of organize your billing into different like sections, and like those got swapped. And then you've kind of got the billing profile, which is like where the actual kind of credit card is gonna like resign. And then in the old version, that's kind of like the account. And then the subscriptions are then gonna get billed like upwards through that hierarchy. The key thing to understand is you can have billing roles. So billing roles give you the ability to make a subscription. So in MCA stuff, if you are an owner or a contributor at any of these levels, that gives you the ability to create a subscription. And then also you can just have a billing role that itself is just a subscription creator like role. EA stuff, it's like very similar. But just a little bit different. So this is from Microsoft documentation, and it's kind of nice because you can see all the three kind of elements at play. So at the top, we've got like Entra ID. Contained with that we've then got like the whole world of like Azure resources, and then over to the side, we've got the EA account. The crucial thing you can see is that the account owners can create subscriptions. And between the two different like versions, like these are the different roles that can create subscriptions. So this is the fun stuff. This is as far as I could tell completely undocumented, and this is pretty new content. So there's a really weird behavior where my billing role in my home tenant can be used to create a subscription in the resource tenant. And I've like deliberately drawn the diagram this way, where it doesn't come from having like federated in and authorized in. I have to be in my home directory, but then when I create a subscription, under advanced, there's the option to create the directory in the resource directory. So if I just try and create the subscription as a guest in the resource directory, it doesn't work. But in my home directory, I have the option to create a subscription in the resource directory. Very confusing. I'll just show you what it looks like. So in that home directory, I go to create a subscription, and then under advanced, I can then choose the resource directory, which you can see like at the top left, it says default directory. That's the directory I'm in my home directory. And then I'm choosing a different subscription directory. So this is kind of unexpected. Like this is like the end result that we get, that when we do then go back and federate in as a guest. Now we're an owner of this subscription after we created it. So we had to create it in the home tenant, but now when we actually go in and federate in, we're an owner. So everyone I spoke to, after we kind of like narrowed down like that this was how this guest had made a subscription, couldn't find a single practitioner who expected this behavior. So we did the natural thing, which is to go talk to Microsoft and like find out what they thought of this. Like, they confirmed that this is intended behavior. It's like meant as a feature. At the time that we met with them, they said there was no controls to prevent like you as the resource directory from preventing this. And they said it's not a vulnerability because subscriptions are a security boundary in Azure. They have since recently updated their documentation and proposed some controls, and we will like cover those at the end. Okay, so how can we abuse this? So before we like get into the different like things that I tried to try and abuse this, it's probably worth just touching on the very weird privilege model that we find ourselves in. So we're kind of like a king of the castle, but our castle is like empty, right? Like, so like subscription owner role is like typically normally like a very like high privileged role. But this subscription that we're owner of has nothing in, right? We just created it. So all the interesting stuff has, is like owned by like admins and is in a different subscription. So, oh, awesome. Yay. Okay, no, all good. All right. Okay, clicker. Oh, does this, what happened? Okay. Okay. Sorry, okay. Can I just, does this work? No. Okay. Sorry. Bear with me. What happened? Continue. Okay. Sorry. Okay. All right. I think I might abandon this and let's just go back to. Sorry. Okay. So yeah. So we are king of the castle, but our castle is like empty. So the question is like, does this hold up? So in terms of like trying to abuse this, the first abuse that I tried was just like seeing like, okay, do subscriptions act as security boundaries? And in terms of going from subscription to subscription, like yeah, they do, right? This is like their intended feature. So good. If anyone here is from Microsoft, like this is good news that like you can't just kind of directly use your owner privileges to get at another subscription. You can like request that the subscription be like transferred to you, but that's going to require someone to approve it. So it doesn't really work as like a way to abuse this. Then another idea I had was like, okay, can you use this to try and kind of offload billing costs? And like again, like no, that doesn't work because like it relies on your billing role, and so because the subscription that you create is tied to your billing role, like all of everything that gets made inside of that subscription is going to be tied to you as the guest. So there's no way to like use this to offload costs. But after a little bit of digging, I did find this beauty, which is then if you go to the access control of the subscription, all this stuff popped up. So if you remember, we were talking about the root management group. So because that exists higher than the subscription itself, if there are any administrators of that root management group, or really anything that has a role at that level, it's going to get enumerated here. So I'm not sure if you can see at the very, very bottom of this screen, like here, I tried to just list out like users, and you could see it said insufficient privileges to complete the operation, right? This is how I think most people are going to be thinking about guests in their environment if they haven't given them any special permissions, right? Like they're not a member of any group, so they shouldn't be able to see the other members of groups, right? They don't have any role to like list users or things like that. And yet, like, we've managed to list out a bunch of users here. And these aren't just any users. These are like really, really like highly privileged targets, right? So in terms of like an enumeration attack, like we've now like identified like who a bunch of really privileged like users are. So you can see there was some like service principal stuff. These were like reader accounts that were like connected up to like different software that was like going through and like feeding that data into like different products. Then you had a bunch of the user access administrators. Those are like for your global admins of the directory. There's a setting that you can switch on where you can say that you want to get visibility into like all of the subscriptions and like get some level of privilege over them, because no one else has privilege over these guest-made subscriptions, right? So you can, but it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Like you can, as a global admin, get some visibility over these guest-made subscriptions, but it's a bit of a double-edged sword because then you end up as a user access administrator at the root management like group, and then you're going to like also be visible to the attacker. So that's a cool one.
Do you want me to click through for you?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. All right. Next slide. Thank you. Okay. So there is a control to prevent this. So it's not by default, but you can say that like if you go into the external collaboration settings, you can say that the user is restricted to only directory objects that they like own, kind of thing, and then that's going to like make it so that you can't do this enumeration thing. But again, not default behavior. Okay, next slide. Okay, so Azure policy. Azure policy is a fun one. Azure policy, like this is like a whole bunch of policy stuff around the infrastructure that we make. So for instance, we could say that, hey, we don't want it so that you're allowed to install on a bunch of like red team tools onto like VMs, you know? That would be quite a sensible policy to have. But because we own the subscription, we can also change all the policies. So we can then make it completely silent and turn off all the policies that would otherwise come on for any red team tools that we are gonna switch on. So that's gonna become useful later. Another thing that I thought was, hang on, the subscriptions are acting as security boundaries against other subscriptions, but like, is there a way that we can affect the directory itself? And managed identities are a way that we can do this. So for those unfamiliar, managed identities are a way that we can give an identity to a resource, right? So say we've got a VM, that VM needs to go do something, we can give it a machine identity that can either follow the life cycle of the VM, or we can have a user managed one, in which case we just make the managed identity ourselves, and then we're going to assign it to whatever resource that we create. So when we do this, that inserts like a service principal into the directory. So this is like a pretty cool thing, because like we've actually managed to pivot, right? Like we're starting to gain some persistence into this system, because like we, as our guest, we make the subscription. We then make a VM. We also make a managed identity. We give the VM that managed identity, and now that VM is going to get represented as a service principal. And the cool thing is that we can assign it the owner of the subscription that we made. So we haven't lost any privilege in this process. And in fact, we've actually done something really cool here, because there are privilege escalation protections against users, but there's no privilege escalation protections against service principals. So for instance, like a user can't, if they've got the change password permission, they can't change the password of someone who's more privileged than themselves. But guess what? Service principals can. So we are now starting to like evade things So we can deepen this persistence even further. This is a technique by the very wonderful and accomplished researcher of DirkJam. Definitely look him up if you're not familiar. Published tons of cool things. He published this cool red team tool where you can basically like spin up just like a lightweight OIDC provider, and that becomes really useful because we can add federated credentials to our managed identity. And so now as an attacker, we like fully control this like service principal and its like credentials. So that like helps us to just get like full persistence like from this kind of like abuse vector. So yeah, cool way to like use this. So that got me like thinking about like some other ways that we can affect the directory. So like we have this concept of like dynamic devices in Azure. So I was like, hang on, would our VM kind of like show up as a device in Entra ID? And what kind of abuses could we have from that? So for anyone who's not familiar, in Entra ID, both users and devices can be members of groups just based on dynamic properties of the groups. So you can see in this example at the bottom, it's like user principal name equals this, means that we end up in this group. I have the good fortune of having a lot of data at my fingertips that I can go see the prevalence of these kinds of things in the wild. So I was kind of curious, like, okay, like how are people using these dynamic device groups? And this is like a real world example that I found, which is just like, hey, if the device display name starts with AVD, then it's going to end up in this group. So obviously, if you're like handing out privileges, permissions based on this group, that starts becoming a problem. This is kind of like a variant of like a known abuse for users, and is like, as far as I can tell, a little bit of a novel approach, like a novel approach for kind of devices, which is that as an attacker, because I can create the VM and I can call it whatever I like, I can potentially guess some of these rules and just kind of probe to see if I can get a device to end up in one of these like groups. So for instance, AVD is Azure Virtual Desktop, and so that's like just someone thinking that's a good way, like if everyone just calls their VMs with like AVD as a start, then we can organize that, organize them like that. The issue is that these can get used in conditional access policies. So conditional access policies are like ways that like it's used in Azure's zero trust model. So for ways of handing out access to users, it may well be that we use the criteria of like, are they on a trusted device to be able to hand out like permissions and like privileges to them. And so often one of those criteria is the device joined to the directory? And so this got me thinking, is there a way that we can get our device to actually like join to the directory? And it turns out when we're making our VM, we can just ask it to have this extension, this Windows login, and that then if we do that, then what, yeah, thank you. But you can see we've got this VM to now be Microsoft Entra joined. And this does have some fun significance. Like I want to explore the full impact and meaning of this. There's a lot of different workflows and things that exist in the world of Azure in terms of devices. In terms of Active Directory, the on-prem version, like computers, which is kind of like the predecessor of devices, those really are just full-blown like security principles. So having for the workflows that are potentially going with on-prem integrations, like hybrid integrations, this could be potentially really bad. I have not explored this in terms of the hybrid approaches. It's a bit of a call to arms for fellow researchers out there. If you are intrigued by this behavior, then this is potentially a way that you can get a computer that's like joined. There's like Intune, which is like a service offered in the kind of Azure ecosystem for like enrolling devices. You can potentially have like automatically enrolled devices that then, if they pass certain like conditions and things, are going to get certain accesses. Something I had to draw the line, unfortunately, of like going deeper in. So I have not researched whether this could be abused in the world of like Intune, but it's definitely an interesting starting point. So yeah, after we do this, we like give this extension. We can then go like take a look, and you can see that, hey, like we've got this device to have like joined, and when trying to like understand the significance of this, I was reading the awesome blog of Dr. Azure AD, absolute powerhouse of a researcher. He's the guy that published AAD internals, which is a really amazing blue team tool and red team tool. He's like one of those clever people who can kind of bridge both worlds. And he kind of summed it up that like the conditional access is can be one of the decision criteria to allow or block access to services. And he also published a blog where he showed how you could steal device identities. And so this was something I thought like, okay, let's give this a go. Let's see if I could recreate this attack using the privilege model that we've got from this guest-based subscription. So the key things to understand is because I am the owner of this VM, I get like local administrator rights. And then because I can decide the policy of what kind of resources get spun up, I can then choose V1 generation images. And that's really important because V1 generation images don't have secure boot and they don't have like TPM protection. So I can basically shut off a bunch of protection that prevents people from exporting certificates from the place where certificates are supposed to be stored securely and are not supposed to be exported. And what we can get here is the device identity certificate. So this is really cool because the device identity certificate, as it kind of suggests, is what is used to authenticate to the directory to prove that, hey, I am this device. So we can potentially use this and then fake the identity. So we could then go take this from a legitimately joined device and then use it, say, on a Linux machine and still make it appear like we are on a Windows-based machine. And you can see, again, Dr. Azure AD saying this may allow evading device-based control access policies as the compliance of the device is accessed against the original device. So some more fun shenanigans that we can have. I really want to explore the device stuff further. So if anybody is particularly interested in doing some nerdy research together, very happily reach out afterwards and we can probe further. Okay, so there is some stuff that you can do to defend against this. I don't want to kind of make this all scary kind of stuff. So in terms of things that we can do, okay, the first and most important thing I'm going to bring your attention to is the root cause. This was something that I found before Microsoft kind of pointed me in the direction of this policy. Originally, they said there was no controls or policies to prevent this from happening. I'm still unclear as to exactly how it behaves. But there is, under subscription policies, there is this idea of subscriptions entering the tenant. It's not completely clear that this policy applies to what I've just described. I think the reason why it applies is because under the hood, when how the kind of guest is able to make the subscription in the resource tenant is that it first of all gets made in their home directory and then gets transferred into your resource tenant. And so you can see, unfortunately, by default, it allows anyone to put a subscription into your tenant, including guests. So you can change that to permit to no one, and you can add in exempted users from that. So that is the way to stop this. I reached back out to the partner that had been affected by this, and they told me that they had this policy already in place and had screenshots to prove it. They were on a enterprise agreement account. My lab testing was a MCA account. It's very, very difficult to get an EA account these days because it's the legacy one. By default, everything is now on MCA. So it's unclear to me at this stage whether what has happened. Was this always the case, and that when I met with Microsoft that they simply kind of weren't quite aware at that point of this control? Is this something that they've added in and that does work for both EA accounts and MCA accounts, or does this only work for MCA stuff, and that the reason why the partner that this didn't work? So I'm unclear. I'm trying to get answers as to whether this is a recent addition or just something that only works for MCA billing accounts. But if you are in an MCA account, I would definitely recommend going and changing this. So this is the new page they have published, and at the very top it says the default behavior of these two policies is to allow everyone. Note that the setting of allow everyone allows all authorized users, including authorized guest users on a subscription, to be able to transfer them. It does not mean all users of a directory. I guess I do have some issues with this wording. I think it's great that Microsoft are starting to try and address this. I do think the word, they still haven't fully documented that guests can do this weird subscription creation behavior in kind of just plain English, as it were. It's kind of, the wording is around this kind of subscription transferring, which it's not immediately clear that that's how things work for guests. And then the main thing I've got just a little bit of issue with is just this including authorized guest users. If you guys have been paying attention, you'll have noticed that at no point did we authorize the guest to be able to do any of this. So I think this is a great step in the right direction, but I would implore Microsoft just to potentially just tighten up the wording, just to make it a little bit easier for users to really understand their true threat model. There's some more important controls that you probably want to take a look at while you're reviewing kind of guest access. So guests can potentially invite other guests, so that's something that we maybe want to not allow to kind of stop the spread of that further. And yeah, there's some other stuff. So do pay attention to this external collaboration settings, and just generally we're going to want to make sure that guests have the least amount of privileges possible, all quite standard security stuff. One thing that I want to just draw attention to is for folks trying to kind of defend against this stuff, it's probably worth your admins just understanding this attack. So when I talked about the service principles, being able to insert a service principle and then we've evaded privilege escalation, those service principles are just one API permission away from being global admins in your setup. And your admins who are defending your Azure setup may well kind of have an assumption that they control all of the service principles, right? They control all of the apps. And we might be able to kind of try and pull off a bit of a daring attack where we use our original guest user account and appear like we're kind of just a B2B collaborator and say, hey, I'm kind of stuck on a project. Maybe you have set it up so that B2B users have got some Teams access, so they can kind of contact you on Teams and things. And then you could say, hey, I'm blocked. Do you mind just giving this this like service principal just a bit more permission. And you would think, well, okay, you know, maybe there's nothing too bad about this because, you know, we control the credentials to all the service principals, and not realize that there is actually a way that those guests themselves could be controlling one of these like service principals. And so, you know, if we get, say, like the role management read-write directory, that's going to mean that that service principal is now going to be able to assign directory roles, and that then we can then use our federated credentials to then authenticate as that service principal, and then assign our guest user that started off all of this, say global admin, and then boom, we are now global admin in the system. So definitely, I think this like weird guest API permission phishing is like probably something that an attacker would only do as a last resort, kind of like to kind of roll the dice to just like see if they can use their foothold in your system to kind of do this, but definitely probably worth knowing about, especially if this kind of like collaboration with your B2B guests is something that is like quite common, of like working on kind of projects that involve like service principals. And then generally, you're probably going to just want to like review subscriptions, who made them. You don't get full visibility, but there is now something in the security center that is an alert that says that a guest has made a subscription. So while you can, as an attacker, evade a lot of the security center alerts by changing the Azure policy to quieten down a lot of them, there are still some things that like it's kind of impossible not to set off in the security center. So yeah. And then the other thing I would just say is if you're using dynamic device groups that have easy to guess rules, you might want to kind of change that, because obviously attackers may well be able to guess those rules and then end up getting devices into that, and that's going to have implications to conditional access policies. So that is the end of my talk, and very happily give room to questions.